I reckon we better move on to our next speaker next. So speaker number 2 for this afternoon session, or I guess second morning session if you're based in the States, is a gentleman who has worked with clients side and agency side. He's commercial director at Branded 3, a leading search market agency with offices in Leeds, London and Bath in the UK. So welcome, Mike Jeffs.
Hi there, David.
So I think, oh, there we go, you've unmuted yourself. Great, okay. So good to have you here, Mike. Of course, Mike's going to be talking about agility in search today. So you're an agile chap, Mike. So I look forward to hearing about this one. So over to you, sir.
Thanks very much, David. You just do the same old joke about the tech. Let me get this working correctly.
Okay.
Here we go. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes, we can see and hear you perfectly.
Fantastic, thank you. So yeah, thanks very much for the intro, David. I want to talk about being agile, and so I've been working in the search industry for 6 or 7 years now. And one of the key things with the search industry is that it's ever changing, which isn't necessarily a new topic, but I suppose with my background being in client services, one of the key challenges is often sort of explaining the changes that the industry is going through versus that sort of client landscape of why do we need to do this, and sort of often getting things done can be sort of the biggest challenge, really. So this presentation is kind of aimed at sort of exploring some of those challenges and if you like, trying to position myself as the guy in between that client and agency relationship, trying to toe that line, I suppose. So hopefully you'll all find it interesting. Just as kind of a quick summary, really. These are actually sort of Google's guidelines in terms of how to leverage mobile-centric searches, essentially, and it's a case of being there, being useful, and being quick. And I think that kind of mirrors for us and what we've seen at Branded 3, the kind of relationship that you need to have client and agency. And I'm sure it's the same whether that be sort of freelance work or depending on the scale of the organization that you're working in. You know, that a lot of the time the challenges remain the same. And I guess kind of one of the things that we've spotted certainly over the last 2 or 3 years in terms of how the offsite landscape of SEO in particular has changed. I think a lot of people often feel that being agile and being reactive is about, you know, sort of often to do with links, and that's right to a degree, and certainly that's, I mean, sort of 50% of all of our inbound inquiries are regarding some form of content marketing or links. So very interesting listening to the presentation previously about sort of seeding content and the steps that need to be involved in really sort of making that successful. But one of the things that we try and do is sort of plan around events. So I've just picked out a couple of, if you like, recognized days that are actually happening this week. And certainly in terms of the offsite landscape, how we use that sort of offsite conversation, what's happening this week, what's happening next month, to try and plan an activity for clients. And okay, this might not be sort of reacting, but we know that it's an offsite conversation that's going to happen. It's how we can, from an agency perspective, how we can, if you like, drop our clients into those conversations. What do we need to create? What do we need to offer? What value do we need to offer in terms of putting our brand message, if you like, and syncing that up with that offsite conversation and what consumers are sort of chatting about. So this is just one that's coming up next week, Tourism for All, World Tourism Day, about promoting accessible tourism for everyone. And again, that kind of one of the key things is the sort of the planning beforehand. So again, echoing what was said in the previous talk about sort of planning beforehand and not leaving it too late, as the arrow suggests. Kind of, if you suddenly spot that this conversation is upcoming, if you were trying to take advantage of World Tourism Day, for example, and try and join that conversation, it's probably too late to do anything about it now. And again, that's another one that's coming up actually this week. Is around the sort of the Macmillan Cancer Support, the world's biggest coffee morning. It's actually been running for about 5 or 6 years, I believe. And again, like the sort of the interest peaks at a certain point, and it's about being prepared for those moments, if you like, to really sort of deliver links and really deliver success from sort of content marketing campaigns. But I mean, these aren't examples of something of stuff that we're working on with clients, but I guess kind of one of the key frustrations and one of the opportunities I suppose we spotted as an agency was that there's a craving for those in the industry like ourselves to know about these events. And it's kind of that information isn't necessarily readily available, or certainly we couldn't find a decent list for what we wanted it for. So we kind of saw it as an opportunity to create one, really. And at risk of sort of plugging Branded 3 a little bit too much in our PR event calendar, I mean, this is a huge tool that we use day in, day out, and we put it in front of our clients as well. So it has helped us sort of bridge that gap of sort of understanding what's going on in that outside world, outside the organization, and in terms of how we can put brand messaging with a search, satisfying search objectives. How can we put that brand into that conversation to really get the value that we need from an SEO point of view? So as I say, we launched this because we couldn't find one. So there's clearly an opportunity for this tool to exist, the fact that we were demanding a tool like this. So, and I think that's a message that we sort of echo to clients. You know, planning around events is key, but also setting up your own events is key, and understanding how search fits into that wider marketing mix and that wider environment is really key in terms of knowing when to be reactive and knowing when to actually plan something out. And for us, I mean, the most common form of link acquisition we probably do is actually called newsjacking. So how we can use these events. So it doesn't matter if it's sort of a bigger event or a smaller event. So listed some previously there, the world's biggest coffee morning. That's what we probably class as a larger event. But there are some smaller news stories, if you like, that are happening on a regular basis. And hopefully the majority of you are familiar with David Meeman Scott's sort of newsjacking life of a news story graph, which is on screen at the moment. And I guess the kind of why I talk about agility in terms of offsite is that it's the timing is so critical. So yes, the relationships have to absolutely be there. You have to know who you're going to be contacting, but you also have to understand the intent and the value that's on offer from a journalist, really. So you'll see here journalists are scrambling for additional information. If you know that event's coming up, and again, that's how we use the calendar, then you can start feeding, if you like, seeding that information. You know, sort of we've got a specialist in this area if you'd like any further information, and that again kind of echoes the previous presentation around, you know, sort of not just asking for you know, coverage or a link of a piece of content, but understanding how that content fits into the world of the person that's trying to cover it and what the value is for them. So it's really sort of about a quid pro quo, and quite often that means that the value is bespoke. It's unique to a particular journalist. We find ourselves doing a lot of individual pieces of commentary or content tailored around a specific journalist's requirements, which is often about being a little bit more agile and kind of involving the client in more of that information as you go along the way, rather than sort of having this big content campaign. We'll go out and seed it out, and then that's all you'll hear of it, sort of thing. One of the key things that we do is sort of try and take them on that journey with us. So here's our idea. We've checked it with a few journalists. Here's their feedback, and that's really how we sort of progress with sort of offsite link acquisition. And our approach really to sort of newsjacking, as I say, it's one of the most common pieces of offsite work that we do. And really to do this, you need one of three things. So you either need some data, you either need a piece of creative, but you can also just offer an opinion. And that's one of the examples that I wanted to come on just next, in terms of how it's not always about the big event and the big offsite conversation. There's a lot of value in the smaller conversations, but doing them more frequently. I've just got an example here for one that we did last week. So this is for a financial services company who are quoting on market movements a lot of the time, and they've got expertise in-house. That's their bread and butter, if you like. And one of the things that we commented on, so an event that we knew was happening last week was Saga, who are reporting on their earnings for the year. So I appreciate I've tried to pick purposely a relatively sort of dry topic in finance. It's not necessarily the exciting, you know, creative content, but it's often a challenging topic to try and gain offsite buy-in with. And essentially there was demand from a site. We've got City AM here around the people who were going to be writing about this event in time, if you like. So there was a need for quotes, and and for market expertise, really. So a great opportunity for us to organise with our client and sort of plan in and say, this event's happening next week. We'd need a quote. We've spoken to this journalist. We'd need a quote around this time. Would you be okay to sort of take part? And I've pasted on the screen there the quote that we got from the client. Really, again, just offering an opinion. I mean, that's all of the resource that went into sort of creating this this piece of coverage was pretty minuscule, and that from a sort of a client service point of view is really key, because you're sort of protecting the idea to a degree, in that there's less resource involved. So you're sort of in terms of managing expectations, there's less expectations to manage, I suppose, which is kind of key, and that's one of the things that we really try and do with clients. The thing that's perhaps changing the most for us is that the kind of the pace and the way that the search landscape is changing means that newsjacking, that kind of only really deals with one half of the landscape. So as I mentioned, sort of so far, it's to do with the offsite landscape, and usually that's for SEO, that's links, because they're still a big part of the algorithm. I mean, Google have released on Friday an algorithm released to do with links. So it's kind of clear to me that it's still a big part of assessing the quality of a website and assessing the quality of a brand. But there are a lot more things that go into sort of, if you like, showing users that this site, this brand is particularly trusted. Now, that offsite example that I just went through with Saga is just one example of how we've shown that this client is a trusted resource because it's being cited by a site of the quality of City AM, which, for those of you who aren't aware, is a big publication in the UK. But if you look at the landscape, it really only satisfies one part of, we can see brand search, mentions, social trust. All of these are contributing to the signals that you're sending users and the way that users are interacting with a brand. And we kind of see our role really as sort of collecting all of these signals as best we can, and if you like, using this as a blueprint for a great search strategy. And if we'd have been showing you this sort of diagram 2 or 3 years ago, we'd have actually included ZEMO in the landscape. And ZEMO, for those of you who don't know, stands for the Zero Moment of Truth. And the Zero Moment of Truth is actually a piece of research done by Google in 2011. This is a piece of research into consumer buying behavior. So in the original sort of first and second moment of truth model, the first moment of truth might be something like window shopping. The second moment of truth might be trying a pair of shoes that you've seen in the window on, for example. And the idea of the zero moment of truth is that it creates these moments that you can capture the consumer's attention in. It's almost a pre-shopping experience, if you like. And it's one of the things that we've certainly for the last 4 or 5 years really sort of tried to put in front of the client at every opportunity. The theory and the thinking behind why we're doing what we're doing, and how this is a moment that a user is trying to search for some information, and therefore if we can be the right answer at the right time, that traditional marketing mindset, then we've got a chance of ranking, improving organic traffic, and therefore that's how it fits into that landscape. So just wanted to talk through an example of on-site, not sort of giving you a couple of examples and sort of events of off-site, and really how we see those two sort of sides of the landscape working together. This is one that anybody who's sort of witnessed a branded tree presentation before will probably be familiar with, and you'll notice a rather subtly placed photo in the background that we won an award with it. So we like to talk about it, but one of the interesting things that I just want to mention with it is how, yes, this was fit for purpose at a time when the zero moment of truth was the theory that we were sort of trying to create our search strategies using, but actually how that landscape's now changed since this went live. So this went live sort of 2012, 2013. 2013, 2014. And for us, for those of you who've never seen this, it's essentially a cruise hub. So it's a guide to cruising for Virgin Holiday Cruises. And it's around about, I think it's over 150 articles that our content team wrote, trying to satisfy searches that people were looking for. So we did a piece of audience research, huge piece of looking at the intent behind cruises, and trying to really sort of position Virgin Holiday Cruises as the ultimate destination to find out about cruising. We knew that the elderly market was sort of in decline, and that there was a new wave of a younger generation of cruisers who didn't actually know what a cruise was like. So do we still dine at the captain's table? They were searching and looking for the information, asking all of these questions, and it was, for us, it seemed a no-brainer to put Virgin Holiday Cruises in those moments of truth, really, and collect the ranking signals, if you like, and that really led to us a real sort of change for them in terms of going up the first page on Google from sort of around the second page to around about four or five at the time, which did offer tens of thousands pounds worth of savings in terms of actual PPC costs. So they were able to gain traffic from cruises without sort of paying for it, essentially. But if we were doing this, if we were sort of reliving this and doing this again, or I think it'd be a lot different. It'd probably be a lot bigger, and that's really because the landscape has evolved. Users have evolved since 2011, since that zero moment of truth research came out. The number of mobile users has shot up, has overtaken desktop. That's pretty well documented. But also on the right hand side of the slide at the moment, we've got this the usage. So the way that people are using Google has switched from to multi-platform. The way that people are using Facebook, I read somewhere the other day that the average person checks Facebook over 150 times a day. So there are all of these opportunities for brands to sort of get users' attention, to satisfy search queries. And really for us, that's how we see our role of sort of, I guess, kind of those moments are sort of getting smaller. So if we were redoing that Virgin Holiday Cruises hub, it would be a case of writing many more pieces of content and making them much more specific. And that really leads on to sort of what we've been sort of pushing clients in terms of what Google are wanting to do, certainly over the last 12 months, is that, as I say, these moments are getting smaller, more micro, if you like, and they really sort of focus more around intent. So for those of you that, this is all taken from Think with Google, which is publicly accessible. So if you do want to check out anything around the micro moments, there's some really helpful videos. They also do some industry specific research. I really recommend sort of reading up on it and sharing it with your clients. It's had huge benefits for us. There are really kind of four areas of intent around micro moments, and that's the I want to know, the I want to go, I want to do, and I want to buy. And really what's coming out is that mobile is the driving force behind making these moments smaller. But the reality is, I suppose, from an organizational point of view, is that we're not able to change as organizations at the same pace as technology changes, or that users pick up that technology. So these are a couple of graphs that I've actually pulled from a fantastic webinar, which was eConsultancy's Digital Shift Trends Report. And the left-hand graph is actually a graph by Scott Brinker, which explores the relationship between how quickly technology and organizations change. And that's for me, that really rang true with the sort of the challenges that you go through with clients. In terms of being able to make technical changes is often a source of sort of frustration from an agency point of view, but equally sort of the pace of results is often a frustration from excuse me, from a client point of view. And what's really interesting on the right hand side is that both clients and agencies, so the dark blue I believe is clients and the lighter blue is agencies, have got very, very similar desires in terms of what they're wanting to do with marketing budget, very, very similar desires in terms of how they feel they should progress. But the reality is just getting those things, getting those changes made quickly. And I just kind of want to touch on the fact that users aren't struggling to kind of pick up. So I suppose in terms of being agile, by not to change, we're sort of missing out. The landscape is moving, the environment's changing, the competitive environment is changing, and so there's almost the cost of not doing something is greater than the return of doing something and not seeing maybe the expected results really. And that's an interesting shift for us in terms of how we're talking to clients, because as I say, users aren't afraid to pick up the new technology. And I've got a couple of stats in here. Forgive me, I know increased usage in mobile is a well-documented thing, but again, just from the same sort of source, think with Google, 96% of people are turning to a smartphone to get things done. So it's no longer about, you know, converting. It's asking questions. It's sort of searching for information. It's the number one resource effectively. So 87% of people are turning to their mobile first rather than going to any other source of information. I know that rings true for myself. And even in the way that we work with clients, you know, people are checking emails on phones rather than desktop. They don't want big exhaustive documents. You know, the moments to communicate with clients are getting smaller, exactly the same way that the moments for consumers and sort of retail brands are getting smaller. And so the window to sort of make changes and get results is becoming less and less, which is both exciting and sort of relatively terrifying, I suppose, if you're a slow-moving organization. And just the final sort of stat is that really the mindset that you've got to be in, as far as I'm concerned, is kind of customer in and not product out. And I think that's probably the biggest shift we've seen in our clients' consumer behavior, as well as our customers, our clients' behavior themselves. You know, people want to be taken on the journey, and it's how you use these moments. So if you take them on the journey, it's easier for them to address that informational need in the future. And as I say, searches for future needs largely happen on mobile. So it's a huge area for us that we're looking at. And in terms of Google, and just sort of tying it back in with how we would maybe see doing the Virgin Holiday Cruises on-site content piece again, it's really about them being much smaller moments. So Google Trips was launched last week, I believe, and there's a great piece of there's a good article, goodthinking.com, excuse me, around the most stressful aspect of organizing travel. So we knew we were onto something with those, the zero moment of truth content, 150 articles helping people on this journey. But really what Google have launched here is that same sort of aspect of informational content, helping people along the way, you know, getting rid of that travel uncertainty, you know, telling them which transportation is best to use. And that almost information is accessible both before and after conversion. That's really for us a good example of how we feel that same sort of cruise hub would be done differently in the present landscape. And I know certainly from personal experience, you know, I do waste a lot of time figuring things out on a trip and being unfamiliar with the location. Location is a huge changing environment. I know our director of search believes that sort of local SEO is going to be on the rise over the next couple of years. And again, I've got a couple of stats later on about the increase in sort of people searching for things around them. And this just really wanted to lead on to sort of how Google are collecting this information. So I didn't know about this until I read about it on Medium. So there's a publication on Medium called Back Channel, which again I'd recommend you reading. And DIN, as it's known short, is daily information needs, and it's a survey that Google have done with around about, I think it's in number of respondents is in the thousands, and they essentially get users to record and diarize their information queries, their requests for information that they've made over a period of time. And there's some really interesting outcomes from this survey, and it's sort of a little bit more manual and a little bit, sort of, if you like, old school in comparison to maybe how Google might collect information if you consider the amount of data that Google have got at their fingertips. But this study alone found that one third of queries go unanswered, and it's something Google have been doing every year for the last 5 years. They're using this data, so I've just got a few notes here to. Out of this study alone, 2 new voice actions have been implemented, 17 new Google Now cards, and they've made 22 changes to existing Google Now cards. And if you like, Google are essentially on a mission to find the unsearchable. And that really echoes with the work that we were doing with Virgin Holiday Cruises, in the fact that we were on a mission Virgin had those answers. It was just a case of putting them on their site and making that site visible at the right moment. So it's about being there and being useful. And I guess kind of how the micro moments are shifting is those moments are becoming increasingly smaller, which means you have to be quick to take advantage of them. And that's what we're telling clients. And this is just an example of how much a search engine result can change. And one example that we talk to a lot with our travel clients is, what's sort of next. We've got local in this screenshot, we've got ads in there, we've got we can book now, we've got rich snippets. There's all sorts of different ways that we can show trust, and these are much more sort of from an on-site perspective rather than off-site. And really, it is about having that sort of counterbalance between both sides of the search landscape. As I mentioned before, really interesting, the way that we're optimizing for search is changing. So near me searches, presumably thanks to Google's ad, certainly in the UK, that came out at the beginning of this year around sort of show me ramen places near me was the ad. I don't know if anybody saw that, but these moments are only going to get more frequent and smaller and more immediate. So I guess from what we're telling our clients is that they can't afford to sort of not move on things, but what we're trying to do is explain why they can't afford to not move on these things. And certainly the way that users are sort of, their search behavior is changing is it's very much more a mindset of, I need this and I need it now. So speed is really critical. And just to kind of qualify that with some data from hotels.com. So they released a survey that sort of said that 74% of mobile bookings are made for same day check-in. So there's a lot of information that people need beforehand, but equally for business travelers, and it's satisfying a need. So again, it's about understanding that intent behind a query, and that's really where we're sort of changing our sort of conversations with our clients and the way that we're delivering search strategies. I just wanted to touch on a couple of the reasons. So I mentioned earlier that it's about sort of satisfying users' queries, but one of the really interesting things is that best practice, if you like, and how the web works changes with user needs, and with technology changing, it makes things more possible. So a couple of technical examples that we know and we've tested ourselves recently are the changing in JavaScript and the moving away from Flash. Flash was something that never worked well for Google. They couldn't really crawl it, and Googlebot are now saying that they'll follow JavaScript redirects, JavaScript links, but interestingly, speed is still a factor. So if it takes more than 3 to 4 seconds to render, or if it's not rendering until an event is fired, it doesn't get indexed. So the on-site stuff is just as critical. And I guess kind of one of the biggest things that we've seen change is that the speed at which technology and technical changes need to be made is increasing more and more. It's sort of David Brailsford mindset of the sum of all parts. Really, it's kind of we're talking about technical changes much more frequently, to the point in which we're testing some of them ourselves. It is about sort of finding out what's next. Standard practice means that everybody is doing it in theory because that's the best practice to do. So really, to sort of gain wins, if you like, in organic search, it's about doing the thing that nobody else is doing and doing it better. It's almost like a new entrant to the market. It's a little bit more like Michael Porter's sort of 5 forces of competition. A good example that I've got, so just conscious of time there, rabbiting on, is actually eBay, who are working very closely with Google to implement AMP. So accelerated mobile pages, for anybody who doesn't know what AMP is. And they're looking at things like smart buttons, and it's really interesting to see how sort of transactional search is becoming, if you like. So looking at input elements like search boxes and check boxes, we're sort of awaiting an era of, if you like, sort of faceted search, if you like. You'd normally reach a retailer and then sort your requirement on the website, but we're reaching a point where it looks more and more likely that you'll be able to do that in a search result, which is really exciting. And again, you can't afford not to be jumping on that if you're in the same space as eBay, for example. They're really sort of seem to be leading the way and making the mark. So I guess kind of how do we beat eBay is the kind of question. And just sort of pulling out a quote from a write-up about what they're doing with Google with AMP is we know AMP pages are fast, but what about the subsequent pages that are user visits? So loading the pages they want to visit at that micro moment is great, but what about the moments either side of that moment? I think that's where we'll see our work with clients and the technical work going over the next certainly 6 months. And just looking at the bottom there, we want an experience to be as fast and consistent as the AMP experience. So as users get used to how quickly an accelerated mobile page loads, that there creates the demand for then everything to load that quickly, which is a really interesting shift. And in terms of being agile enough to sort of capitalize on those moments, that's where, for us as an agency, we're trying to take our search strategies. And as sort of Tom Anthony pasted a link there to his slideshare around the sort of the funnel is almost about to collapse. If you look at the other retailers, so Argos, AO, it's almost that you can search, sort, filter your search within Google and also check out there as well. So it's a really interesting sort of verge of sort of transactional search, faceted search, as I say. A couple of tips just if you wanted to get sort of into accelerated mobile pages, and there's a great article by Built Visible sort of examining it and some of the success they've had with it. And also if you're on WordPress, we recommend sort of checking out pagefrog.com, which is also a WordPress plugin that you can actually, if your site is on WordPress, then you can start sort of playing around and sort of getting some benefits from AMP. I just kind of wanted to finish off, tie it back in with being agile. And I suppose historically the way that we've worked as clients and agencies is that we've done technical work as a one-off at the beginning, certainly if we rewind back to sort of 2011, whereas what we're seeing now is that we're doing technical audits more and more frequently, but looking at a smaller subsection of items within that, what's best practice, what's pushing the boundaries of best practice. So I think in terms of how we talk to clients are, in terms of our roadmap, the things that we're doing to try and affect search results, it becomes a little bit more like a matrix rather than sort of a waterfall or a sort of a roadmap. It becomes this sort of map of things to do rather than a journey that's a linear line. So that's the biggest thing that we've seen changing, and that's what we're trying to champion with our clients. And it's really about sort of using this kind of matrix to find the things that you can affect. So completely understand that slow-moving organizations can't always change everything, and sometimes there are sort of queues in development, or it's not as straightforward to change an alt tag or a meta description, but it's finding the next best thing for us and understanding, I suppose, the cost of not doing it. And we've seen some success in explaining technical changes we want to make by showing the opportunity cost of not making a change like this. And I guess just to finish with the sort of parting thought is the hype cycle, which is something from Gartner. And I suppose technology is changing at an unbelievable pace. So the number of things we're going to have to look at from a technical point of view, the number of moments are only going to get bigger. So I suppose keep an eye on technology changes. Virtual reality are some of the ones in here, and look at the lifespan of those as a technology, and try and see how they can fit into your search strategy. And that's kind of what we're doing at Branded Tree. And most importantly, as I say, with my client service hats on, is really about taking the client on that journey and communicating changes with them as they're happening. That's what we find is the best way to success. And thank you very much for listening, and hopefully I'm doing okay for time and take any questions.
Thanks so much, Mike. It was a wonderful presentation there. So much involved there, really. It's hard to actually pinpoint one thing or a couple of things from your presentation, but I'll try. We had a few nice tweets going on using the hashtag Digital Olympus, of course, so keep on using that, everyone. Daniel Morales said the figure that jumped out at him was 74% bookings made for that day in hotels.com. Quite incredible. And that made me think, actually, in terms of actually jumping on newsjacking and stories that are happening at the moment. How far can you actually plan ahead with so many people making decisions that particular day? How far is it possible to actually plan ahead and actually jump on these stories?
Yeah, so with that example, with the Saga newsjacking example, so that was a case of we've got to a stage with a client where we brought them into that journey pretty early, and we're sending here's our plan for next week. Here are the events that are happening next week. Are you okay to comment on this day? And sort of, we've got into a real nice rhythm with that now. But I mean, essentially, you can plan, you know, if you're looking at doing any sort of Christmas campaign, you need to start planning that now, and actually researching whether or not that's going to get any coverage now. You know, if you think about the number of, it's way more complex doing a creative campaign and doing a piece of content, as sort of in the previous presentation we discussed, in terms of, you know, involving the people that are going to be that piece of content out to, should help you guide that timeline, really. But I don't think there is any sort of right or wrong. Each event dictates a different style of organization and different timeline in its own right, really.
I guess it depends if this story is cyclical. If it's a one-off, you can't plan too far ahead there.
Exactly, and I think for anything that's new, we try and sort of scale it back a little bit, so that you're not hanging all your hopes on the big creative or the big idea kind of thing. You know, try and take the client on that journey and go, here's you know, first version, and here's how we might make it a second version next time. And that's what we're seeing a lot of success with newsjacking in particular, and then trying to vary that up with extended data and extended creative content as well.
We also had Clockwork Talent tweeting love. We've got the live conference feed on in the Clockwork Talent office. So hopefully there's a few people with the video feed going on in the background, so that quite a few people can watch at once. So if that's you, let us know using the hashtag Digital Olympus. Just one final question I was thinking of, actually, and that is, how do you measure the impact of your opinion being included in the press? You had an example there of an opinion being included in the City AM. If there's no maybe direct link in there, how can you actually measure the impact of that?
We're really struggling to measure direct impact, being completely honest. It's really difficult, particularly because we don't want to go on to into the sort of the older world of sort of share of voice, you know, old sort of PR metrics. But the way that we try and measure everything is getting that link, that placement, that coverage. That's only a tactic within the search strategy. So we're measuring search strategies as a whole, you know, using traffic increases, you know, ranking improvements, revenue driven, and correlating the tactics and the time at which we're delivering those tactics. And that's the majority of the reporting that we do, because everything sits under that search strategy. And as long as you're measuring the environment on the same basis, then we feel that that's a pretty fair test of progress that's being made.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thanks again, Mike. Really great presentation. Thanks, sir.